Welcome to Cartridge Talks. On today's episode, we're going to answer the #1 question asked on the internet.
Does size really matter?
Welcome to Cartridge Talks. It's often said that bigger is better when it comes to big game, and I personally often subscribe to that theory. But Ryan, how effective can a cute little cartridge like the 6-ARC be for deer-sized critters?
Mark, that's what we're here to find out. Now, originally the 6-ARC was developed at the request of the DoD pretty much in a gas gun format. They're wildly popular in that kind of format, but they're also coming out in bolt actions where I think the cartridge really comes into its own.
It's really interesting, you know, the research that I've done looking into the 6-ARC, to me, it really hits a nice sweet spot of effectiveness for that application.
It does. Now, there's limited factory offerings in hunting style bullets, if we'll call them that. So I took some reloading liberties on the bench, so to speak. We've got a couple of different bullet varieties and styles that we've curated that we think would be optimal for the cartridge and the application. We're going to be shooting into gel, examining terminal performance. We're even going to get to have a little fun and shoot steel too.
We've taken cartridges that we would normally use in a gas gun, gassed them up, and put them in the bolt platform. All right, before we get started shooting, let's have a talk, Ryan. You ever hear of a cartridge called the 243?
Right here.
Oh, what luck. People use that to kill deer for quite some time.
60 plus years.
You know, I used to take some heat from my friends. I had a 243 back in the day. I actually had a couple buddies that had 243s as well. They killed a lot of deer with it. They inspired me to get the 243. Then most everybody else I knew shamed my 243. Oh, that's not enough to kill deer.
That's ridiculous.
The more that we've done work with these different cartridges, the different bullets, bullet construction, the more I realize it's an incredibly capable cartridge. And now we kind of have, in some ways, a modernized 243 called
the 6mm ARC.
Now, is it exactly the same? No. Does it come pretty close?
It comes close enough to be appreciably effective and viable at what I would consider respectable hunting distances. To talk to that particular 243 load a little bit, that's an 80 grain Barnes factory loading. It's moving about 3350. That's the box posted velocity out of my guns are doing around 3200 or so. It's undeniable big game cartridge though. Pronghorn, mule deer, whitetail, no sweat.
I'd say, yeah, like medium-sized, big game, moderate distances, being cognizant of shot angle at times, but still incredibly capable.
Enough about the 243.
Let's talk about the 6-ARC. Ryan, you know how I love factory offerings, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're a master reloader, but I'm more of a factory guy. Options are a little bit limited for the old 6-ARC.
This is about it, Mark.
That's it. At press time.
The 103 grain ELDX. This is the Precision Hunter load from Hornady. And it's a marvelous load, but I'll say this. Hornady has to factory chamber these rounds to function safely and reliably in both gas-powered guns and bolt guns. And while they shoot very well, the result is you're a little on the slow side from velocity. I still wouldn't hesitate to take a big game animal with this particular bullet and this particular loading, as long as you were keeping your distances moderate and you knew your shot angles and all that. But I think there's more to it.
Well, I agree, and that's why you loaded these.
A smattering of different various projectiles.
Yes.
Shall we go down the line?
We shall.
All right. So Mark and I looked at the different 6mm bullet offerings that were on the market space, and we thought, you know, what projectile is going to lend itself useful to the case? I don't want to put this very, very long, high BC projectile in there. Number one, because typically those aren't perfect for hunting, but two, I'm eating into that case capacity. I wanted to use that case capacity, what was available, and try to get the most out of it. Again, if I'm going to attempt to benchmark this cartridge against others like 6 Creedmoor or 243 Winchester, we got to give it all it's got. So starting off, this is an 80 grain Barnes TTSX into the 6-ARC. So same projectile is loaded into the 243 Winchester there. This is really neat because this one ended up at about a 30-80 muzzle velocity for an average. I think there's more to go there, working with the powders that I had on hand and you know, trying to be safe and intelligent with this. 30-80 is more than respectable. This is a bonkers tough bullet. I've used this in 243 for whitetails, pronghorn and mule deer, and I would definitely not hesitate to bring this downrange again.
So Ryan, apples to apples, 30-80 with that. Yeah. Where do you get with this 243?
Out of my guns, about 30-250.
Okay, so the 243, yes, more?
Yes.
But?
Not a ton more.
Yeah. There, now I've done it.
Moving down that line further, the 95 grain Barnes LRX. This is a similar yet very different bullet in construction to the TTSX that we just looked at. The LRX is designed higher BC, longer profile bullet, a little different ogive. The magic behind it comes with the internal geometry that Barnes has engineered into it. This is a 90 grain Sierra tipped Game King. So this is an adaptation of the very famous Game King bullet, which was a traditional soft point that Sierra has had in their line forever. We see a wildly redesigned like profile, ogive, and length. The bullet's numbers, I think, speak for themselves when you look at it on paper, what they're bringing from a ballistic coefficient and just the engineering and the layout of the bullet. And it's kind of a sleeper.
It's kind of a sweet spot, perhaps.
This is a compelling option. I'm very curious about how this is going to do.
Last but definitely not least, we have the 90 grain AccuBond. Now, Ryan, this is a bullet that I've used with great success.
Just this year?
Just this year for a variety of game. It's always performed incredibly well at close and far distances. One I'm definitely excited about. Bonded bullet construction.
Yep.
Built to stay together, high weight retention, drive deep. Any other thoughts on this guy?
Exceptional ballistic coefficient as well. I don't want people to look at this as like a plain bullet, if you will, because it's not. It's a really good, if you're looking to maximize potential at distance, that one also has the numbers to carry it.
All right, well, enough talky. Let's shooty.
I'm in. First into the gel, the Hornady Precision Hunter. This is a 103 grain ELDX.
Very nice.
Well, that did its job.
Yeah. All right, up next we have the Barnes 80 grain TTSX. Let's see how it does.
Up next, the 95 grain Barnes LRX.
Good hit. Interesting.
Cool. Nice block.
Up next, the 90 grain AccuBond.
But a lot going on up here though. It's a tough little bullet. We're there. Next up is the 90 grain tipped Game King from Sierra.
Impact.
I know.
Well, Ryan, excellent shot. That's it for the 100-yard gel test.
Go look at that one. It'd be easier to see through if it hadn't been dropped.
It looks like it did a pretty solid job.
It really did. This was one I was very excited about. Wound cavity up front is pretty dramatic.
So we shot gel at 100, but we're outside with a lot of room to roam, Ryan, and I'd say what's the fun in 100 when we could shoot this thing at 300?
And I really want to know how those bullets are going to do anyway.
Yeah, I am very curious about that. It is hot, little breezy, lots of mirage, something we haven't done before.
No.
I'm excited to do it.
2 bullets that we picked, the 95 grain LRX and the 90 grain tipped Game King. Those we thought, subjectively, were the 2 outstanding options. We're gonna see what they do at distance.
Now, honorable mentions, I would say the AccuBond and the Game King were a bit of a toss-up for me. We pulled back on the 103 ELDX because it doesn't have the velocity your hand loads do. So just some food for thought.
Let's do it. 95 grain LRX, 300 yard ballistics gelatin. Let's hope I don't miss. Instead of us walking all the way down there, we've sent the, what do they call them?
The production team?
Production team to go fetch our blocks, swap out a new one. It's really nice in the shade.
Does this mean we've made it?
I think so. I want to look.
So do I. Bring us our jet.
Right?
That's what I want to say. This side.
Oh, there it is.
Oh dear, I was looking in the wrong spot.
I thought it exited.
That is quite impressive.
Look at that, full expansion too.
Lovely. Should we shoot again?
Yes. Quick, we got a good wind condition.
I know, let's go.
All right.
Up next, the 90 grain tipped Game King. Excited to see how this one does at 300 yards.
That one's gonna stick, I think.
Well, I sure hope so. All 3 shots felt good to me. All right, Ryan, let's see what these Game Kings did.
Which time?
Yeah, so what do I blame that on? Is that the mirage, the wind, the reloading, Ryan? Certainly not my shooting.
Certainly don't be ridiculous, first of all. Secondly, this is actually kind of nice because they landed exactly the same depth into the block.
That is interesting, for sure.
Seemed to have performed famously, so.
I'd say those would shoot a deer just fine.
I had really high hopes for this bullet, and it did not disappoint.
Cool, let's get these on the bench and compare them.
All right, we're gonna start our analysis off with the only factory-loaded hunting bullet, and I'm gonna put air quotes in front of that. Currently available from one of those big major ammunition manufacturers. This is the Hornady 103 grain ELDX, factory load again in the Precision Hunter series.
Essentially the baseline that we're gonna measure your hand loads against.
2,700 feet per second and pretty much on the button. Very, very flat SDs on this load. And this is the kind of thing I expect out of the Hornady line. This is day in and day out what I get out of them. And this is a pretty interesting bullet. If we go back to its inception, it's really a long-range hunting bullet that does really well in a cartridge like this because we don't have a screaming fast launch velocity. So you can't really have it both ways with projectiles. You can have one that operates at a particular velocity band very meritable. And let's take, for example, like a Barnes. You need some sufficient velocity to get that bolt to deploy, and then you're gonna end up not appreciating super good performance at extended distances. With a bullet like the ELDX, this thing really comes into its own once we start shedding velocity and, you know, looking at it from like the extended distance standpoint. It is a rock solid factory offering.
I think it's incredibly capable, and because of its design and that somewhat slower launch velocity that we were getting out of that rifle, performed extremely well at that close range of 100 yards. We didn't shoot it at those longer distances today, at least into gel. Now I'm kind of wishing that we would have.
We can always revisit, Mark.
I know.
I want to get a measurement on this. 20.5 on the nose. This did awesome. That and this load shoots so good that don't feel you need to hand load necessarily.
I think it's incredibly capable.
Absolutely.
But you know, if you can spice it up, why not?
Well, that's what we're here today to learn about, Mark. Now, it's very hot, and you'll notice that our blocks are slowly beginning to degrade in quality. Also that they have a lot of, I don't know, local roughage on it. And that's because Steven decided to gun the Ranger with the tailgate open full of blocks, which then deposited themselves all down the range. It wasn't until 40 or 50 yards later that he realized what he'd done.
We were able to flag them down.
And so we apologize for the condition of the blocks. We'll work on that. Anyway, the Barnes 80 grain TTSX.
Here it is in all its glory. Man, Ryan, just a little 80 grain projectile going pretty darn fast.
30-80.
Doing some pretty serious work.
Yes, I think that this bullet in particular, or similar bullets like it in this cartridge, make the recipe for the shorter range application. And I'll say 300 nit.
Sure.
Right, that I think is the solution. So this thing is a speed demon. Like I said, I'm going about 30-80 on average out of the little 22-inch Howa. Very characteristic TTSX expansion. We pulled off about 24 3/4 inches of penetration from the face of the block. And notable thing, TTSXs, they deploy very quickly. In fact, it's something not a lot of people think about with coppers, but they do open up quite a bit. And on this bullet in particular, the 80 grain, the way that it's built and the nose cone is engineered, the petals actually expand a lot more than you'd think. The frontal diameter gets quite large. And that's why it didn't really go as deep as I thought it would, I think. And combined with the velocity too. It's a high impact velocity, plus big frontal diameter means relatively short for copper penetration.
You know, not surprising compared to like the Game King or the AccuBond with the permanent wound cavity up front. You know, maybe not appearing as large, but still adequate. And I'd say would definitely do the job.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Well, if it's penetration you're looking for with the old 6-arc, Ryan, apparently the 95 grain Barnes LRX is the ticket. Notable in that regard. In fact, to me, surprising when compared to some of the others.
I'm gonna call it 32.
I mean, I'm not surprised that it did really well, but it did there's a lot more penetration there.
I'm gonna show you a little bias and tell you I was really hoping this bullet was gonna do very, very, very good.
Oh, I knew you would.
And it does. This is a pretty special bullet. Again, to touch on the differences between the LRX and the very famous TTSX, the LRX is designed for lower velocity expansion. It's a longer profile bullet, higher ballistic coefficient, ergo more retained energy and velocity at distance. I still don't think that this is the long range solution because it is such a tough bullet and it does require velocity to expand.
Sure.
This is probably going to be what I hunt with.
Okay.
Yeah. So one thing that I have a great deal of admiration for the Barnes design is they deploy way faster than you think they would, despite the velocity requirement. And I don't want to overstate the velocity requirement because it's a lot lower than you might think, but they open so quickly in comparison to a cup and core bullet that's reliant almost totally on friction and like material disruption to open. And when you're looking at the permanent wound cavity, we got to understand a little bit about this first. There's no secondary fragmentation. There's no other pieces of copper or lead to peel off. The Barnes has this very typical helix pattern and then a narrower but still very prevalent and present wound cavity that cuts all the way back, like we're deep core drilling a hole out of it. And yeah, 32 inches of penetration out of a pretty mild cartridge speaks volumes to what a bullet like this is capable of, and especially when it's placed correctly.
If you're going to shoot a 6-arc, I think you definitely gain some leeway on shot angle with this bullet. I mean, it drives deep. Because it opens so uniformly, they tend to track super true, so you can essentially bank on that straight line penetration.
Exactly, and that's why I am so selective personally to these projectiles. I don't always have a perfect broadside shot. I'd love it, but sometimes it doesn't happen. We talk about larger cartridges giving us an insurance policy. Tougher bullets do that for me.
Sure.
Yeah, this one is just significantly
a standout.
Yes.
Here we have the 90 grain Nosler AccuBond, Ryan. Again, looking at it in the gel, performed as I would have expected, which is quite well.
18.5.
Bonded bullet, tough construction, meant to drive, but also meant to expand.
And it did.
Did all those things.
I picked this bullet because of exactly what you just said. The AccuBond's gonna be a little bit tougher than the Game King. It's a trusted bullet for the both of us. And I knew that it would suit the case well. It's not an overly long bullet, still carries a very respectable ballistic coefficient. I think this is a very, very good marriage. If you're looking for a little more toughness and you've got AccuBonds available, don't look the other way.
Nope, definitely a viable solution for this cartridge.
2,900 feet per second about on the button with this. The Tip Game King and the AccuBond launched at almost identical velocities. They printed almost identically too. I think this is a choice. If your rifle likes these better, this is the way to go. But man, again, I'm impressed. I see that permanent wound cavity, like very, very immediate expansion. I know it's an AccuBond. It's going to maintain a lot of its integrity as it moves through. I'm happy with it.
I am too, but we must look at all of them.
Indeed.
Next on the docket, or the shooting table more appropriately, we have the Sierra tipped Game King. Ryan, this is a really cool bullet, one I actually personally don't have any real world experience with. Tell us a little bit about it.
Again, an adaptation of the very famous former Game King. I shouldn't say former, still an active bullet. They've added a very sleek green polymer tip and lengthened the ogive, lengthened the overall profile of the bullet. A lot of the same attributes that we see in the Match King and Tip Match King, but it still has a little more integrity in the jacket. It's a cup and core bullet, but a little heavier tapered jacket. Not as light as an ELDX, not as heavy as an AccuBond, kind of that nice right in the middle.
Hearing how you describe this bullet and looking at it in the gel, to me it performed as advertised, notably up front with probably the largest permanent wound cavity that we saw.
Agreed, yeah, absolutely. And I was really looking forward to this particular projectile, as I thought it might be kind of that Goldilocks situation where it ends up being about perfect. We want initial expansion, right? So we're working with a marginal cartridge. We need an energy transfer. That's undeniable. I also needed integrity. I didn't want a bullet that was going to be fragile. I'm going to use the word frangible, and maybe that's not quite the right word for it, but I needed a little more oomph to get through the thoracic cavity of, say, a whitetail or a mule deer or a pronghorn. This delivered.
What are we looking at for penetration?
17 inches on the button.
Pretty solid.
It has everything. Great choice. Criticisms of past tests mostly stated we're shooting into gel, and that's not authentic necessarily, and that it's only at 100 yards. So because we have the facilities to do so, we chose to shoot at 300 also. We picked our favorite bullets. Surprise, surprise, I picked a Barnes.
I went with the Game King. And I wouldn't say it's my favorite, I just really liked it a lot and was extremely curious about it.
Well, my curiosity has been satiated, Mark, because we pushed a 95 grain LRX into the block 36.5 inches. And I'll take that all day long.
I mean, that thing did some absolute work. One of the heavier projectiles in the bunch, not the heaviest, but heavier. Just a sleek, sporty thing. Opened up beautifully, penetrated beautifully, solid permanent wound cavity up front. I don't know. There's really nothing not to like about it.
With today's environmentals, my impact velocity on the face of the block should have been about 22.98, so we'll call that pretty darn good. This would have exited the thoracic, likely, of a whitetail.
I like it.
I'm impressed.
I'm very impressed. Now, anytime that it's taken more than one shot to get the job done for me in the field, I always like to say the important thing is it's dead. This block is definitely dead. It has 2 projectiles contained, one that has exited. None of them are exactly in the center, but we do have examples to look at, and the 2 that are in the block actually performed identical.
They did. They landed at exactly the same distance. I'll turn to the 4th wall and have a tape measure thrown my direction. And from the face, we'll call it 25.5.
The old tipped Game King at 25.5. Maintained its structural integrity, lost a little bit of material up front, excellent wound cavity, as we saw before. Substantial penetration, I would say adequate penetration for sure. Man, I'm really liking how this one did.
As we said earlier, we kind of theorized this was the Goldilocks bullet for a cartridge like this at this velocity band. 2,900 foot per second launch velocity, exceptional ballistic coefficient, exceptional accuracy, and then that really good marriage of intentionally fragile nose cone, integrity in the rear, it's going to carry you the distance when you're putting it on game at distances like 300 yards. And I really think that this is a pretty special bullet, and I hope that people looking at cartridges like this, or 6GT or 6BR, if they're going to hunt with it, consider a bullet like the Tip Game King, because it really does bring a lot to the table. Now, we're showing a little bias to velocity during all of this today because we do have a bolt gun and we do have the ability to run pressures higher, safer, and squeeze more velocity out of it. But you might not necessarily have to.
You might not have to, and like you said, if you do want to get a 6-arc and a gas gun and a bolt gun and you want a factory option, you can shoot that 103 ELDX in both. I wouldn't be surprised if we see more factory offerings come to the table as time goes on, as this cartridge gains popularity. The last time I had this much fun shooting a rifle, we were shooting 22s, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. No recoil, not a lot of report, very fun to shoot.
The 6-arc.
I'd hunt big game with it.
Now, shooting these bullets into gel at 300 yards, Ryan, is incredibly interesting. But do you know what else is incredibly interesting?
Dictionaries?
And shooting further than that at 300, 400, 500, and 600 yards at steel.
Oh, we get to shoot more.
Let's have some fun.
I'm in.
All right, we've proven what this little 6-arc can do in gel. We're back on the range. Now it's time to shoot some steel. We've got a target array. We're gonna shoot 300, 400, 500, and 600 yards, all one shot. Ryan, 600 yards, can you shoot a 10 power scope at 600 yards?
Get on the gun, Boardman.
Yeah, fine.
Good hit.
All right, what's my number at 4, Ryan?
656.
All right, Ryan, what are we doing at 5?
Mark, you are going to give me 977. Hit, dead center.
600 yards, Ryan, this is it.
Stand by. Centered.
I'll take it. You can't shoot a 10 power scope at 600 yards. You want to go at it?
Please.
Back center plate. Back center plate. Back. Nice shooting, Ryan.
That really is a fun gun to shoot.
It's an absolute sweetheart. I mean, you transition between all those targets super smooth. All of your shots were center plate.
You do have a little recoil. It's not like it's non-existent, but it's akin to about a 223 maybe.
Maybe.
Come back through the recoil sequence, you actually watch the trace come into the sight picture and then hit the steel. Big confidence builder. As much as this is a big game rifle that I'm gonna hunt with, I'm also gonna like shoot recreationally because it's gonna help me with disciplines and fundamentals. And I'm quite pleased with this.
There's really nothing you can not like about it.
Agreed. Mark, I'm exhausted, but I'm very pleased.
I tell you what, that rifle and the cartridge it's paired with is an absolute joy to shoot. I mean, it definitely outpunches its appearance, I guess, if you will. It does an incredibly good job, and it is just so forgiving in so many ways. I am quite impressed.
Would you hunt it?
I would hunt it. I mean, again, like I shoot a lot of 300 WSM type cartridges. I do think that they offer a level of
Insurance?
insurance. Yeah, it is like an insurance policy. Are they harder to shoot? Yes. Is there more recoil? Yes. Can you not spot your impacts all the time? Yes. So there's drawbacks as well. Within reason, at I'd say reasonable distances, man, the 6R I think is incredibly capable.
I would have to agree, handily.
The Midwest whitetail hunting out to even Western hunting, I wouldn't hesitate to use it.
Yeah, it's not a 700-800 yard gun. It's, I
No.
think, maybe a 300-400 yard gun on a very optimal day with a very optimal shot. But I've got a handful of pronghorn tags in my pocket this year, and this is making the trip.
I think it's going to be a great choice. A great choice for a lot of people if you're recoil sensitive, if you're small statured. You know, I used to think, oh, I'll get my girl started with a 6.5 Creed. I think I'm going to go to the 6 Arc.
I think it's a good idea.
I'm sold. I'm so sold, I think I'm going to get one.
6 Arc for big game. I guess it does work.
I think it will. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Cartridge Talks as much as we did making it. Tune into the Vortex Nation podcast where Ryan and I dive deeper into the gel, literally extract some projectiles, talk even further about this fantastic little effective cartridge.